This is the best video you could have clicked on for Christmas. This is actually a Christmas video in the sense that mostly when you go to Christmas, you actually are confronting your family again. You are coming back into contact with the milieu you grew up with. You are associating yourself again, connecting again with the people who brought you up when you were a child. This is such an important thing to understand and to think through. So in this video, we're going to talk about Carl Jung and healing yourself from family dysfunction. Healing yourself from family dysfunction. So really what this comes down to is the dynamics of your family and the influence your family has had on you, on your development. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about some ideas from Carl Jung. I'm going to share some ideas of my own, some experiences from my life, some experiences from others that have told me about their life, my close friends, different people. We're also going to look at different psychological ideas like what is dysfunction, what is a dysfunctional family, and how do I go about navigating that in my own life. So this is going to be a highly practical video for you to help you in your own life. And it's also going to help you understand more about Carl Jung's psychology in regards to the mother complex, the father complex, and we're going to be able to look at those and look about how we can integrate that into our lives so we can become our true selves. And what that really means in a practical sense is that we are able to manifest or allow the full expression of our unique and individual self, which is our instincts, our genome. So we all have a particular genome. We all have our own individual DNA that is different from those around us. And that means we're an individual, but we need the right environment and the right configuration, our relationship between ourselves and the environment for us to be able to manifest the full potential of our genome, the full potential of our biology. That's what really this is about. This is about, in Jungian terms, it's about individuation. It's about becoming yourself. And the reason why that's important is a dysfunctional family will hinder you from becoming yourself. It will actually trap you from being able to live up to your full potential. And that's why I think this video is so important. Coming into Christmas, you're going to be coming back and seeing different family members, most likely. I mean, some of you might not be doing that, given some people don't even celebrate Christmas. But I'm saying in general, this is a holiday period where most likely you'll be coming in contact with your family. You might even think you have a good family. You might even think you have a good relationship with your family. And I'm still going to talk about that and talk about those different aspects, no matter how you were brought up, whether you had a horrible family life. We're going to talk about how that influences your development and how you can overcome the pitfalls of neglect, the pitfalls of abuse, of trauma, of those different aspects of being treated less than as you were growing up, being abused, being hurt. But then we're also going to talk about being spoiled, being looked after too much, being coddled, having loving parents who really cared for you and you didn't have to struggle too much growing up. That also has an impact on you, and it can be detrimental as well. So we're going to talk about that as well when we talk about the mother complex that Jung talks about. And we're also going to look at some of the psychological interpretations of religion and how that shows us these principles of the mind. The principles of the mind, that is so important. In my channel, a lot of it talks about different Jungian interpretations of religion, the psychological interpretation of religion, not the literal interpretation. That is really important to understand when I begin to talk about that later in this video. So keep that in mind because I don't want people to misunderstand what I'm talking about. Jung used a lot of different examples of mythology to articulate the psychodynamics of the mind, to articulate the development and the different expressions of what he called the libido. Now, the libido is psychic energy for all intents and purposes. It is, I guess, in some sense, it explains the psychodynamics of the mind. It explains the different emphasis or energy that is moving throughout the mind, or the different configurations of the mind, whether it be conscious or unconscious, right? And so we're going to talk about the role of the libido in the idea of the family milieu as well, because that's very important. Okay, so we're going to begin here by I'm just going to share a little bit about my life, my background, and understanding the dysfunction in my family. And that will kind of kick us off. And maybe some people relate, maybe some people won't relate. That's okay. Hang in here. We're going to talk about lots of different things here, but you can hook in and understand something from every aspect that I say anyway. So basically in my life, just so you know a little bit about me, is I've had a lot of difficulty in my family life. And I would say from the very beginning, that is how it has been, just by default. So I grew up in a single mother household with my mum. My mum and my father separated when I was about one to 2 years old. I don't completely remember. I was quite young. My only memory of them together really was them arguing with each other and just yelling. I just remember me crying in the corner of some garage, and my dad was yelling, my mum, was there. And that's all I remember, is people yelling at each other and fighting when I was younger. So it wasn't a very good atmosphere for a young, baby, child, toddler to grow up in. And as things progressed, I did develop a relationship with both sides of my family, with my grandparents on both sides, which, kind of gave me a different perspective, because my grandparents are very different from my parents. So that was kind of interesting. But this whole back and forth of having two different families had this weird split in me, and this weird idea of, well, this is this side and this is that side. And there was always this tension that I could feel, and that was articulated by both sides. For example, my grandma on my dad's side would speak very negatively of my mother, and later they would actually have a fallout and just like completely never talk to each other ever again. Because my mom didn't want me to go on some trip because I was sick when I was about, I don't know, I was pretty young. I can't actually remember how old I was. It would have been before I was 10 years old. So, growing up, there is this kind of tension where, both sides would be talking bad about the other side. My grandma, my dad would say negative things about my mum. And my mum wouldn't necessarily say negative things about my dad. Well, maybe a little bit, but most things she said were pretty truthful and honest. If it was negative, it was like something that was quite honest in my estimation anyway. But you would have things like my mum's side would say, oh, your grandma is babying you or making, trying to mother you too much. And I think that was true. My grandma from my dad's side, in some sense, tried to kind of take me away from my mother at a young age. And it was kind of this interesting thing, because even in Jungian psychology, there's this idea of the two mothers, and you see that throughout mythology, this idea of the two mothers. And I think that actually did influence me in some way. But as I grew older, I began to become more, I feel like I was always quite conscious of it, even as a child, that I was resisting when someone spoke out of line against my mother, I always kind of resisted it on my dad's side because I thought it just doesn't feel fair that you would criticize my mother. Like, why would you even say that right now while I'm here? There's something wrong about that. I felt like an injustice was happening, even if it partly was true that my mum was quite young and didn't know what she was doing. She had me when she was 19, turning 20 that year. So she had me at a quite young age. And for years and years and years, she struggled to support me. She, worked different jobs. She was a cleaner. She, did different things. And then eventually she became an assistant in nursing, and she's done that ever since. So I'm very happy that she got kind of a little bit of an okay job. But even then, it's been quite a hard life for my mother, really. And as I grew up, I kind of lived mostly with my mum. As I said, my grandparents helped when I was younger, but then there was more of a split. So in my teenage years, I still visited my grandparents, but mostly I grew up with my mother. My dad saw me on and off. Sometimes he'd see me like once every 2 weeks, once every month. But then there were some years where he didn't see me at all, really. So my relationship with my father was kind of like dependent on the whim of whatever he was doing at the time, however his life was going or whatever he thought. My grandma actually encouraged my father to talk to me more, which I don't know if that was a good thing or a bad thing. But basically, there's this dysfunction going on there. And I would say actually my father he remarried later in life and had another child, which would be my half-sister. But then even later in life, he actually broke up that marriage and doesn't really talk with them very much either. And right now, I don't really talk very much with my father because things have progressed, and I reached a stage where I thought to myself, I kind of have to make a decision whether I want to put in the effort to be around my father because he makes me feel quite uncomfortable, basically because his personality is that he will always talk about some weird inappropriate thing about his kind of sex life or something. It's like kind of some weird thing that it's like you would say to a mate or a friend, but not something that you would talk to your son. And the main idea that I had was that I don't feel that in both sides, really, my mother or my father really listen to me, listen to who I am as an individual, listen to what I'm saying. And as I grow up, I guess my dad would give me random advice, but it would always be this like, just this advice that is like so generic that it doesn't even really apply to the specifics of who I am as a person. And so I always thought, well, this is kind of like uninformed advice, even though the advice itself might be okay. And sometimes it wasn't. Sometimes it was just like ridiculous advice. But so, I've had these different random experiences. And so and then, there's a lot of other stuff that's hard to share. But I had some strange experiences with, my grandparents on my dad's side. And, I feel like they betrayed me in certain ways, like they were trying to manipulate me, set me up in different ways. Not so much my grandpa, more my grandma was doing that. And so, I don't say this to, call them out. I actually do care about them to a certain degree. I still have love for all of my family members, no matter who they are. I do respect them, but I have a healthy distance from them because I realize the influence that they have in my life. I realize who each individual is and how they operate. I realize the patterns over their life, the things they say, and I've reflected on little instances that I've had with each individual person, including on my mum's side. Let's not just pretend that they're all perfect either. There definitely is like heaps of dysfunction on my mum's side. Just as much dysfunction on my mum's side. And, like, for example, growing up with my uncle is really into like working hard, being successful. And there's nothing wrong with that in and of itself. But there's something wrong with the way he approached communicating with me and other family members. Like he tries to control situations every time we're there. I mean, he pays for stuff, but the paying for stuff is almost like a control mechanism, over people's lives. And like, giving unsolicited advice, again, that does not apply to your actual specifics of your life. So my mum, God bless my mum, I'm closest to my mum out of anyone. And my mum is really the main person I keep in contact with, and I will visit my nana as well. And I feel sorry for my grandpa. I visited him in hospital on my dad's side, and like I respect my grandpa. He's my Chinese grandpa. He hasn't really done anything wrong per se, but he's just, kind of caught up in the mix of all this other stuff that's going on, So, I'm sympathetic towards my family. And even my father, I do love my father, but there is this kind of, weird ambivalence between myself and my father because of, I guess him not really playing the role and stepping up as a proper father, and me recognizing that has forced me to react to that and respond to that in an appropriate way and say, well, look, you haven't really acted as a father. I'm not just going to like keep coming around for you to, talk about all this weird stuff all the time, So I kind of separated myself there. So that's kind of where I'm at in my life and my journey, a little bit of myself, some self-disclosure. And it's something that I'm still kind of working on, looking through always, because it's something that is important to our lives, But moving on a little bit, I've had lots of different friends who have had dysfunctional families. One of my friends, they used to get beat up a little bit. Their brother used to get bashed all the time from their father, and that's not really, going good at all. And basically what that produced is later on in life, my friend said that his brother who got bashed from his father became quite aggressive and abusive to him and his mother later in life when they were trying to live together again. So there's something there as well about this intergenerational passing on of abuse that is this abuse cycle that keeps flowing, and so growing up with this trauma, this abuse, being ridiculed from their family, not heard, not listened to, dismissed, stuff like that. So I think that that's been a horrible experiences from lots of different friends and within my own life as well. And also I've had another friend, for example, who had a traumatic kind of upbringing, but yet their family kind of stuck together a little bit, which is a bit different from the other families. But I remember there was a bit of dysfunction. He would say things like, oh, I don't want to get my driver's license, for example, because if I get my driver's license, then my family's going to expect me to go out and drive them all the time. And I'm like, yeah, but dude, it doesn't matter about that. Just get your driver's license. You have to be strong. You have to have the ability to drive places so you can be more independent. And he's like, no, it's just you don't understand, they're just going to put more demands on me. It's like, dude, I understand. Yeah, your family's going to demand you do this and that because now you can drive. But if you don't learn how to drive, you are going to sacrifice an aspect of yourself because of your fear that the family is going to put more demands on you. So this is what this video is going to talk about. These kinds of things where the family will block you from growing. The family will block you from reaching your full potential, and so you don't want that. And that's part of being a dysfunctional family. Let's look at what a dysfunctional family really is, kind of from a psychological perspective in general. So there's a few different types of dysfunctional families, right? Not every family is the same. They're like little tiny social systems. And Jung kind of talks about it as the family milieu that you grow up in, right? And so there's just different elements of dysfunction, and there's kind of a spectrum of dysfunction. And there's different behaviors that make up what a dysfunctional family is like. Some dysfunctional families may have a lot of conflict. Your family, your mother and your father, or different relatives may be constantly in conflict with each other, fighting, yelling, abusing each other. There might be lots of misbehavior, doing devious things, doing things that break the law. Or it could be that you are just being neglected by your family. Your family doesn't pay attention to you. They don't show interest in you. They don't listen to you. They don't talk to you. They don't actually come and engage with your actual life. I feel like my experience mostly embodies that most of my experience has been one of neglect, where my actual father and mother don't really listen to me that much. They don't really try to understand who I am as an individual person. And, my mum has tried a little bit, I think, but, to the degree that she really can, I think that there's also this idea of capability. Your parents might not be capable of actually being a good parent in some sense because of who they are and who they've become throughout their life and through how they've been brought up and who they are biologically as well. There are certain circumstances and limitations to how different people grew up, And so there's different aspects to life. You could also be someone who grew up quite poor, who didn't have much in your life either. So your family kind of adopted this struggle mentality and you picked up that struggling aspect from them. Or on the reverse, your family could be very well off. And so they didn't feel a need to, emphasize very much. Maybe they gave you everything you needed. But now you've been mothered and babied so much that you have become soft. You've become a bit weak. You're not able to actually face the challenges of life because life is hard. And, the way you've been trained from your family is that people are all nice. People are honest and respectful. But then you've gone out into the real world and now you've met people who are vicious, people who are manipulative, who are violent, who will take you down, who will pull you down, who will criticize you. And now you can't handle it because you haven't been prepared for the real world. So either way, no matter which way your life has kind of brought up, you may experience these different challenges in life that happen, and different things can happen. You can become codependent on your family. So in other words, you can't really operate without the relations of one or more of your family members. That's what codependency is. Being truly dependent, being truly independent means that you are not relying on others for your own ability to function. And that's ideally where we want to head. Not that you don't want any relation to your family at all, but that you want only relations that are healthy for you. And if they're not healthy, we need to deal with that. We need to diagnose that. Not that I'm going to diagnose it here for you, but you need to go away and diagnose it. You need to figure it out. But the ideas in this video are going to help you to think through those different problems so that we can deal with them. Another aspect is substance abuse. I think that plagues a lot of families, that causes a lot of dysfunction. I know in my own family, my mother and others in my family have, been alcoholics, and that has contributed to a lot of dysfunction in their lives and in my own life to the degree that they impact my life, and so those things have been quite challenging. And then another thing is mental illness, especially undiagnosed mental illness. So there might be a lot of mental illness in your family, but it hasn't really been dealt with. It's not something that's been talked about, and you just kind of have been putting up with it. You've just kind of been going, through the motions, trying to get by, or you might not have even realized it. And you might think, okay, Auntie Sally is just, on my case all the time. But no, Auntie Sally actually has a problem and she needs help, and so there's all these different configurations that a family can undergo, but we're going to break down some of the core elements throughout this video. And so we're going to look at the different dynamics between you and particularly your parents and see how that impacts on your life, see how that influences your development, because you can be hindered a lot from either something that they've done to you or what they fail to do for you as a parent, right? And so you can have different parents who lack empathy, or they lack understanding or a sensitivity towards you, and therefore you feel like no one really cares about you or no one loves you or understands you. And then when you develop relationships later in life, you find it harder to relate to other people because you haven't had that good development between yourself and the parents when you were younger. Now, of course, not everything can be blamed on your parents. You know, as you progress, you are your own self, hopefully, and you have some agency within your own life, hopefully, that you can kind of start to making your own decisions and choices in your life. So I wouldn't advocate for blaming your family or your parents for the outcome of your life, just like you wouldn't attribute, you know, your parents to your complete success in your life either. So I would say though that they do have an influence on your life, and to the degree that they do, it's highly important to understand those things so you can understand the appropriate boundaries to make for your circumstances right now in your life. Because the boundaries you set, the way you relate yourself to your father, your mother, to other members in your family is very important. You know, we're going to talk about having permission to go your own way. And that is so important. And so we'll get into that when we get into some of these Jungian ideas on the family, right? But let's move on now, basically a little bit to just some common ideas out there. So, you know, I would say that as you're growing up, as you're developing as a person, you know, it's important to understand that your personality is a bunch of different patterns of behavior that are regular across time. And those patterns of behavior, those patterns of thoughts, those patterns of thinking, those patterns of feeling, they come from a mixture between your biology and your education and how you're brought up in life. And so who you are fundamentally, how you act, is influenced heavily by your family. And it's important to understand dysfunction within yourself when you are operating in your personality in such a way that is non-adaptive. In other words, the way you're operating is not healthy. It does not do good for you. It actually works against you. It hurts and hinders your relationships. That means the way you are relating to other people is unhealthy. The way you are integrating into society is not working. That means you are not able to adapt properly to society, to live and form proper relationships, and to undergo a proper career or work, and to live as a person who can get along and function. So dysfunctional literally means you cannot function. So if something is not functioning or is not functioning very well in any aspect of your life, then you have dysfunction. And that dysfunction, it's good to think of as a pattern of your personality that manifests itself through your behaviors and through your thoughts and feelings. And those patterns continue to persist. So you'll see yourself often doing the same thing again and again and again. That is a pattern. You are stuck in a pattern. That pattern is either biologically derived or derived from your environment, and you've been modified to live out that pattern throughout life. Okay, and so that's why exploring our family dynamics is so important. because it shapes this pattern of our life. It shapes how we integrate into society, how we relate to other people, and how we function in ourselves and relate to ourselves. We could just be by ourselves, but we could be depressed or not think of ourselves highly. We could, be insecure or not feel very confident in ourselves, or we could feel disconnected from other people. We could feel like we are unsupported, or that we're jealous of others, or that we envy others, or that we could have had a better life, or we missed out on life, or we should have had better experiences. I wish this worked out in my relationships. I wish I had more experiences in my life, but it didn't work out. And we start thinking about how our lives didn't quite work out, and so these ruminations, these rationalizations of why my life didn't work out, I blame my family, they're just kind of on the surface, but we're trying to dig a little bit deeper to look at the actual pattern that we're stuck in, reverse that pattern, break away from the unhealthy aspects that are contributing to that pattern, and then free ourselves from that. So that's what we're going to do right now. So one interesting idea in popular culture that I just want to briefly talk about here is, if you've ever watched the movie about Bruce Lee, have you ever watched that movie? I think it's called Dragon, the Bruce Lee story. If you look up on YouTube and you type in Bruce Lee defeats the demon, Bruce Lee defeats the demon. If you watch that video, it's really interesting. It is when Bruce Lee, you'll see he'll be in this scene where he has all these mirrors around him. And then all of a sudden he's kind of in this dreamlike state, and this demon comes and attacks him. And this demon is dressed in this armor, this military armor. And the demon attacks him, and his son is there. And his son, he calls out his son's name, Brandon, and he says, "Brandon, run!" And he's trying to get his son to get away because the demon's there. And then he faces the demon with the nunchucks, and he begins to fight that demon, and he basically overcomes the demon and chokes out that demon with the nunchucks, right? So, but the idea there is and then actually, if you keep watching the film, it actually goes from that mystical kind of mythological type story back to him being in the room with the mirrors. And the mirrors is like self-reflection. You're looking around, and there's the fragmentation of multiple mirrors of self-reflection. It's like looking into different aspects of yourself to find yourself, right? And that dreamlike motif of fighting the demon to protect the son is connected to his father's demon. It's this demon that is connected to the bloodline, and it's this mythological idea that if you face the problems, the dysfunction within your family line, you can break that dysfunction. And, in some Christian circles, they actually believe that there is this a curse that you break over your family line. And, that comes from the idea that we are in sin, right? Like from the idea of we inherit the sin from Adam. So it's like this inheritance of dysfunction, of evil has beguiled us through our inheritance of our family line. And that's an interesting thing to think about also, just biologically. You have, because obviously a large part of our personality is biologically derived, right? And so you inherit the different genome from your parents. And so you also inherit the problems from your parents as well that come through the expression of that genome. So a large part of this video, a large part of overcoming the dysfunction of yourself in a Jungian sense is so that you can become whole, you can individuate. What that means in another sense, biologically, is that you can maximize the full potential of your genome. And if you're maximizing the full potential of your genome, that means you are actually becoming who you are. You are manifesting the genome's potential in the environment, in actuality, in the real world. But it's important to note that that's not necessarily always going to be a positive thing, because you got to think, what is really hidden in the genome? And you got to remember, your shadow is also an aspect of yourself. It's also the negative sides of the manifestations of the genome. So as you completely become whole, as you release your wholeness and become who you are, there'll be negative aspects of yourself that manifest. And you have to also counter those as well and understand them. So it's just interesting that there's this idea, this mythological idea that I think is also informative in our psychology of breaking the curse of your family line. It's a good mythological motif to understand the psychological idea of breaking away from the influence of the family and purifying yourself, so to speak, becoming a true individual. And then you can come back and relate to your family, if that's possible, in a positive way. That's the whole idea we're going to go through in this video. So I'm going to read this quote from Jung, and we're going to keep talking about the idea of the individual in the family. So here's a quote from Jung. It was rather a psychological effect, apparently arising out of the individual's difficulties in adapting to the conditions of the family milieu. The disharmony between the parents on the one hand and between the parents and the child on the other seemed especially liable to produce psychic currents in the child which were incompatible with his individual way of life. So you can see there what I was talking about earlier. Jung is saying that the dysfunction that is between, the disharmony between the parents is actually harming and antithetical to the child becoming their individual self. He uses the word his individual way of life. That's what I mean by the genome. That's what Jung means too. It's basically the culture of the family is impacting the biology of the individual from manifesting itself. The instinctive aspect of the individual of the child is not able to come to fruition because of the cultural overlays of the family dysfunction that are impeding on this individual becoming themselves. And so if your family is fighting and there's lots of arguments and disruption, that can pull you away, that can produce certain problems within you psychologically that pull you away from your real purpose or your real destiny as it pertains in a biological sense, and so and also not only the relationship between your mother and father, but the relationship between your parents and yourself obviously also disrupt your ability to become yourself. And so I'm going to read another quote from Jung when he says, "We know that the first impressions of childhood accompany us inalienably throughout life, and that just as indestructibly, certain educational influences can keep people all their lives within those limits. In these circumstances, it is not surprising that conflicts break out between the personality molded by educational and other influences of the infantile milieu and one's own individual style of life. It is a conflict which all those must face who are called upon to live a life that is independent and creative." So that's what, if you've been around my channel for a while, or if you're new to my channel, that's what my channel is all about. It's about becoming yourself, what Jung just said, being independent and creative. It really is about creating yourself out of your potential of your biological self. Your full potential is manifesting in the world. And that's what I want for myself and for you and for those who listen here. And if you are drawn to this content, if you come and clicked on this content, you are someone who is seeking after that. You are naturally seeking after the full realization of yourself. Otherwise, you wouldn't have clicked on this type of content. And I don't mean that in any woo-woo way. Like some people are like, oh, you're here for a purpose. It's like, yeah, your psychology was attracted to this type of video, or the algorithm served you up this type of video because it knew you were attracted to this type of thing. You were looking at these things across the platform in other ways. And so this is really important. This is what Jung's work helps us to do. It helps us to, in his words, to individuate, but it's to become our real selves, release our actual potential of who we are. And because we are all different in a sense, because we have our own individual biological makeup and constitution. And because of that, we have our own way, our own law, our own life that we're meant to follow. We're not meant to just follow in the footsteps of our family, although they are a big part of instilling certain values and standards in us if they do that in an honest and good way. However, we have to go beyond that and really live out who we are as individuals, because none of us are truly the same. And Jung said there to be creative. So that actually means to generate something outside of yourself from yourself, right? But it also means to break away from the tradition, to break away from what the family has set you up to do, because what the family has for you might not be what you were really destined to do. Now, that's not saying some people have a family business and different things like that, and they adopt that as their true responsibility, and it really does become a part of themselves. I don't see anything wrong with that. But for the most part, I think it's more common that the family will have a certain idea, and that idea does not actually line up with who you really are. So I see it a lot in Asian families. They will say, you have to go to school, you have to become a doctor, you have to do X, Y, and Z. But that person has their own being, their own way of operating, and you need to go and find that way of operating and not be so beholden to what your family think of you, right? Okay, so I've got another quote here from Jung. Owing to the enormous influence which childhood has on the latter development of character, you will readily understand why one would like to attribute the cause of a neurosis directly to the influence of the infantile environment. I must confess that I have known cases in which any other explanation seemed to me less plausible. There are indeed parents whose own contradictory nature causes them to treat their children in so unreasonable fashion that the children's illness would appear to be unavoidable. Hence, it is almost a rule among nerve specialists to remove neurotic children whenever possible from the dangerous family atmosphere and place them among more healthy influences, where, even without any medical treatment, they thrive much better than at home. There are many neurotic patients who were clearly neurotic as children and so have never been free from illness since childhood. In such cases, the view outlined above seems generally valid. So you can see there is this idea that getting away from the dysfunctional family is actually what is important for a lot of people. Now, maybe not for everyone, but specifically for people who are in this dysfunctional aspect, they would thrive better being away from those negative influences. And that's what I've seen in my own life with certain people in my life and my family. Being away from negative influences has helped me become more of myself and being less entwined into their bullshit, basically. Okay, so here's another quote from Jung. It was soon noticed that these patients really did live partly or entirely in their childhood world, although themselves quite unconscious of this fact. On the contrary, it was the arduous task of psychoanalysis to investigate the psychological mode of adaptation so thoroughly that one could put one's finger on the infantile misunderstandings. As you know, a striking number of neurotics were spoiled as children. Such cases offer the best and clearest examples of the infantilism of their psychological mode of adaptation. They start out in life expecting the same friendly reception, tenderness, and easy success to which they were accustomed by their parents in their youth. Even very intelligent patients are incapable of seeing that from the very beginning they owe the complications of their lives as well as their neurosis to dragging their infantile emotional attitude along with them. The small world of the child, the family milieu, is the model for the big world. The more intensely the family sets its stamp on the child, the more he will be emotionally inclined as an adult to see in the great world his former small world. So you can see there what Jung's talking about is basically those people who are treated too well. So we talked a lot about abuse, dysfunction, but those who were treated really well in their family life also can gain this dysfunction because they were mothered too much, in the sense. They were looked after too much. They were treated too softly. They had too much of a nice life, basically. And now they're weak. Now they think that little model of their family life applies to the world, but it does not apply. The world is not like that. The world is harsh. The world is evil in the sense that there is evil aspects within the world, and they're going to encounter that, and they're going to not be able to cope with that or adapt with that in the real world. So in other words, the family did not prepare you to face the world properly. And so now in Christmas, you're going to go back and talk to your family, and all these old ways of relating are going to come back. You know, whether it be traumatic and horrible, or whether it be supportive and more of the quote unquote motherly style where you've been looked after and pandered to, either way, it's going to cause some dysfunction, right? If it's a really bad, horrible family life, it's going to cause injury. You're going to go back there and be like, oh no, not again. Not this dysfunctional, horrible family. You know, I have to put up with whatever, and this person says this. It's horrible, you know? Or, okay, they're all treating me nice. This is great. My family's looking after me. And then after that, it's like, oh, wait a minute. That's not reality. I'm living in a delusion over here. You know, I'm not facing up my responsibilities anymore because I'm actually being lulled into complacency by the supports of my family. I'm not becoming an individual because I'm relying too much on the structure of my family. So, you know, no matter which way your family is configured, there is some work to be done here, you know. And so now I'm going to move on a little bit more to the things I'm really excited about, that I love about talking about this, because I feel like this is just so important when it comes to family, you know, and I can see the psychological principles. I can see it echoed in the different religions as a psychological manifestation of, you know, the unconscious. And so this is what I really want to introduce to you today and what I was really excited about, but I had to kind of build it up. So this is the crescendo. If you listen to my videos, you'll see that I do offer gems at the beginning and throughout, but I always do save something for near the end. So hang in there. There's always these exciting gems that come at the end, and I always do share sometimes the most important thing at the end. And I think I do that because actually the people who can stay and listen deserve to hear it. They deserve to hear the end because they're the hungriest. They're the people who really need it. Why else would you be listening to this still if you still weren't hungry to sort something out? And that's why the real, gems are at the end of most of my videos. So here we go. So this is a quote by Jung. On the evidence before us, we can say that this sacrifice means giving up the connection with the mother, relinquishing all the ties and limitations which the psyche has taken over from childhood into adult life. From various hints of Miss Miller's, it appears that at the time of these fantasies, she was still living in the family circle, at an age when independence was an urgent necessity. It is therefore significant that the birth of her fantasies coincided with her journey abroad, i.e., with a breaking away from her childhood environment. It is not possible to live too long amid infantile surroundings or in the bosom of the family without endangering one's psychic health. Life calls us forth to independence, and anyone who does not heed this call because of childish laziness or timidity is threatened with neurosis. And once this has broken out, it becomes an increasingly valid reason for running away from life and remaining forever in the morally poisonous atmosphere of infancy. You see in that quote the emphasis, the importance that Jung puts on the idea of becoming independent. You have to establish your own independence from the family. If you don't do this, you will develop a neurosis. You will develop a neurosis. And you do not want that. You do not want to remain too intertwined, too caught up in your family structure of where you came from. You don't want that. You need to break away from the family milieu. You must do that at some point in your life. You can come back to your family as an individual and reestablish a new relationship later. But that's different. That's a different type of relationship to the former relationship. And not everyone can do that either, because some relationships are so turmoil, it's best just to cut them, completely cut them. And it'll always be an individual basis. Some people's family has died. Some people, their parents are in prison. Some people's parents are killers, murderers, rapists, horrible people. What are you going to do? You see, some people are so dysfunctional and they won't change, and they'll always be abusive towards you. They'll always abuse you. What, you're going to go and reconcile with them? No. You are going to cut yourself away from them. You are going to respect yourself, identify who you are, and identify the situation and the appropriate steps to take. Don't do it hastily. Think about it over at least a few months. Take 2 to 3 months to think about it. Come to the decision. Is this keeping me back, my relation with my family? If it is, you have to break that relation and to become more independent. It doesn't mean you never talk to them again. It might mean that to some people, and for others it might just mean a period of time where you can separate and become yourself. That could be 3 months. That could be 4 to 5 years. You don't know. I can't say. For each individual, it will be different. It could be a year away, traveling somewhere, breaking away from the family. But you don't come back and then just devolve back into what you were. You come back and relate in a new sense. You create a new relationship. You relate back to them as the new individual you've become. Why have you left them in the first place? You've left them in the first place so you can become an individual. That's why you've left them. Now you're coming back to reestablish a new relationship with them as an adult, right? Now, if you can't do that, then you don't reestablish the relationship. If you only ever devolve back into your childish ways and it's keeping you back, you don't reestablish that. You cut that off and you become an individual in your own right. And it doesn't matter what happens, right? So now we're going to get into this seriously in a little bit more later. So here we go. Here's another quote from Jung. Now this quote, I want to preference this. So we've been talking about, remember, Jung said that if you remain in your infantile surroundings, if you remain in the bosom of the family, you will endanger your psychic health. You will develop a neurosis, right? You have to establish your own independence. That is paramount. But what is this all about? Why do you have to do that? And it hints to what I was talking about before, about the manifestation of the potential of the genome, right? And so Jung now is going to talk about different religious ideas that relate to this. This is actually the chapter before. This is the paragraph before the paragraph I just quoted about breaking away from your family, right? So let me read this. What is this all about? Okay, so this will help. This is a quote by Jung. Who does not think here of Mithras, who in the Toraphoria took his bull, or as the Egyptian hymn says, the bull of his mother, namely his love for his Mater Natura, on his back, with this heaviest burden set forth on the Via Dolorosa of the Transitus. The way of this passion leads to the cave in which the bull is sacrificed. So too, Christ had to bear the cross to the place of sacrifice, where, according to the Christian version, the lamb was slain in the form of the God, and was then slain to the earth in the sepulchre. The cross, or whatever other heavy burden the hero carries, is himself, or rather the self, his wholeness, which is both God and animal, not merely the empirical man, but the totality of his being, which is rooted in his animal nature and reaches out beyond the merely human towards the divine. Okay, so we can see there, Jung, if you haven't understood this, and it is quite confusing when you read Jung, honestly, like I can understand if you don't quite get it, but I'll say it in very simple terms. Basically what's going on is Jung is talking about the individuation process. He's talking about becoming whole. He's talking about the full realization of your potential. He's talking about the full expansion of your wholeness, which results in the increase of your personality to its fullest extent, the full manifestation of the potential of your genome, right? In order to achieve that, in order to connect with the self and do that, you have to sacrifice. You have to go through a sacrificial process. And that's why the different religions denote that. That's why they show that mythology, that motif within their mythology. That's why they show that aspect of the story. It's a manifestation of the unconscious processes projected from these different religious stories. And that's why when we do a cross analysis of different religions, like a cross-cultural analysis of mythology, we then understand the story that was projected in those different religions, which is basically the unconscious expressed throughout society and throughout culture, right? And so we can see in Mithras, which is a Roman cult, and I'll put up the picture now of the bull that is slain. Jung is equating that bull as a symbol with the idea of the mother complex. And it is an idea of slaying the mother complex. That's what he's saying. And the idea of Christ carrying the cross is you're carrying yourself and you're sacrificing yourself in order to reach wholeness. That's how you do it. And we can go further and understand that this involves breaking away from the father and the mother. This is a big part of what you carry to the cross. What you carry that is a part of yourself to sacrifice is you are carrying the configuration of the complex of the father and mother built up within your own psychology, and you're sacrificing that on the altar so you can become your true individual self. So the former aspect of yourself that grew up in the family milieu has developed the complex of the father and the complex of the mother, connected to the archetype of the father and the mother, all right? And that's influencing you. And that's a part of your self-identity, your ego. But you are carrying that cross on top of yourself and sacrificing it so you can rid yourself. You can die to yourself, die to that identity, die to those relationships that you formerly had, the ties, the configuration, the dynamics of the relationship that you had with the family in the past. And you break that. You break that curse, so to speak. You break that configuration that you have with them. And you free yourself from that so you can become an individual. You free yourself from that so you can clearly see the God image, or you can clearly see the relationship between you and the self. Because the relationship between the father and the mother in reality will cover up and hinder your relationship with the self. So you actually have to work through the complex of your father and mother so you can actually completely realize the potential of, the divine in your life. That's why Jung said at the end there, not merely the empirical man, but the totality of his being, which is rooted in his animal nature and reaches out beyond the merely human towards the divine. So what does it mean, rooted in the animal nature? That's what I was talking about when I was saying the full potential of your genome. The full potential of your genome is the instincts that you have to manifest, is partnering back with the biological aspect of who you are, which is the transpersonal element, which is called the divine, right? So so what happens is the education or the learning or the culture that overlays the biology of your individuality is influence from your family. So you have to break that training. You have to break that influence over your mind so you can actually become yourself. Okay. And so let's read this next quote from Jung. The whole of the libido is needed for the battle of life. The dreamer cannot bring herself to this decision, which would tear aside all sentimental attachments to childhood, to father and mother, and yet it must be taken if she wishes to follow the call of her individual destiny. So that sums up what I'm talking about. If you want to follow your individual, if you want to actually reach the destiny that you were purposed for, that you were designed for, in a genomic sense, in the sense of your biology, if you actually want to manifest the full potential of who you really are, actually in the biological sense, manifesting through the psychological sense, you have to rid yourself of childhood. You have to break away from the father and the mother. It's the most painful thing to do. It's so hard to understand. It's so confusing, especially if you've had trauma, dysfunction, confusion. You didn't even have a normal relationship with your father and mother and you're trying to break away. It's like, that is so hard to comprehend. But that's what videos like this are for. So we can talk about it in the depth, in the deepest way possible. No other videos really talk about it in such a deep way. No one goes into these things like we do here. If you're still here, you are someone who is doing the deep work just by listening to this and trying to consider it in your life. You are doing deeper work right now. You're meditating on these ideas. You're trying to unravel and reflect on your dynamics of your family. That's why this is a Christmas video, baby. This is the most Christmas video you'll ever hear. This is the true Christmas video. This is what people should be talking about. This is the reality. The reality is we go and face our family on Christmas, most of us. So this is what we should be talking about. the real stuff, the real work. This is the real work. Okay, now I'm going to quote Jesus and the Christian scriptures, but I want you to understand, because I've had people misunderstand before, and I don't like to be repetitive, but I have to basically say this. If you want to understand what I'm saying right now in a full way, you can go and listen to another video I created on my channel. You can search it on my channel. It's called Jung's Deeper Meaning of Introversion. And I basically talk about the psychological understanding that Jung has of Christianity and of the Christian scriptures. So when I say this, don't think I'm talking about it literally. Don't take it as I'm pushing some Christian agenda. I'm not. I'm actually interested in all religions because I'm really interested in what's called the perennial philosophy, where all different mythology and religions overlap. And Jung opened my eyes up to that because there is a meaning and an influence that they all point to something very similar in the middle of them. Yes, there's important differences on the edges, but in the middle, there's an important message that is indicative of our psychology. So this is a psychological interpretation of these scriptures, okay? I have to emphasize that. And that's actually what unlocks the most of the meaning from the scripture, the fact that it's psychological. It's like, wow, it's so powerful. So this is both from the canonical scriptures in the Gospel of Luke, and I'll quote Jesus, and then this is also from the Gnostic scriptures in the Gospel of Thomas, and I'll quote Jesus in the Gospel of Thomas. Okay, so here's a quote from Jesus. If anyone comes to me and does not hate his father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, and his own life also, he cannot be my disciple. That's from the canonical Gospel of Luke, all right? Now, I'm going to first just straight up say, like, there's going to be a Christian that goes, oh, it's not the right interpretation. It's not a good translation. He didn't mean hate. He meant this. Look, remember, I said it's a psychological interpretation. This is what the psychological interpretation means, all right? It means that nothing, your family is not above seeking the self, seeking the archetype of what Jung says is the archetype of the self, which is the archetype of wholeness, which is the transcendent mind, if you will. It is the transcendent personality. It is the ultimate aspect of who you are, the higher part of your personality, right? There is nothing, or the God image, there is nothing. Your family will not, is not, cannot be put above you seeking the fullness of who you are in God. All right? That's what it means. Your family cannot be above the fullness of who you are. And so that speaks psychologically to the idea that you can only really become a true individual through connection to the transcendent, which enables you to manifest the wholeness of who you are, so you can manifest the full potential of your personality via relationship with the unconscious. You can only do that if you break off the bonds of your family, break off the training, the education of your family, specifically in the areas where God or the archetype of the self or wholeness would have you become yourself, right? So, and let me read here the Gospel of Thomas way of saying it, okay? This is what Jesus says in the Gospel of Thomas. This is from saying 55 in the Gospel of Thomas. Jesus said, "Whoever does not hate his father and his mother cannot become a disciple to me. And whoever does not hate his brothers and sisters and take up his cross in my way will not be worthy of me." So this is basically what it means. In Jung's psychology, it would be taking up the complex of the father and the mother and laying it down at the altar. The complex, the way you relate to your father and mother, is then projected onto all male and females that you interact with throughout your life, through your ego, through your understanding of yourself and your identity. You lay your identity down along with the complex and the relations you've established with your father and mother, with your family, and you break that ego and you overcome the limitations of your former personality so that you can become the higher personality that you really are, in the broader sense of connecting to the transcendent, the divine in your life. That is the psychological meaning and understanding of these scriptures. That's what it means. It's a psychodynamic. It's a way of relating to, it literally is talking about the way you relate to the complexes that have developed within your psychology and how to transform those complexes so you don't get trapped in your ego and so you can connect to the divine, or what's said is the archetype of the self, or the God image. That is the way, that's the religious expression of that psychodynamic process that Jung articulates. So in a practical sense, it means going away from your family for a while. It also might mean in yourself, you're conscious that you do not project the father image continuously as developed from when you were a child. Your schema, you might say, this, you can talk about it in more modern psychological terms, the schema that you've developed of your family, you have to change. And these religious experiences that people have, they're not just outward expressions of faith. They are existential, inward experiences of perception that people have had. People experience these types of things in their life and it transforms them. That's the whole idea of the 12 steps. Often it's quoted, and I think Jung says too, people who are seeking alcohol, who are alcoholics, they're really seeking the divine. They're really seeking the divine, but they want to get intoxicated from a substance. And that's what our life in our modern world is often about, using substances to feel a buzz instead of harnessing what Jung talks about, the libido, in the right way. Remember, there was that quote that it's not possible actually to break away from the lull of the family because we're stuck in it. We're entwined in it without actually harnessing and developing a relationship with the unconscious to gain the powers and strength of the libido. And the libido is a generalized energy, not just sexual energy. It's a generalized mental energy, or the energy of the psyche, that enables us to have strength and vitality in our life, right? And so, like, for example, when Christ in the Bible, in the biblical text says, I'm here that I give you life, what do you think that life means? It means libido. It's the libido energies that it's the energy from the archetypes and the unconscious that are actually harnessed in a helpful way, because it can be harnessed in a negative way. The libido of the archetypes, the unconscious, can capture you and completely destroy you, right? But if done in a sensible way, the libido can come up and give you the right amount of energy and power and life, that you have the strength to overcome the limitations of your family, the limitations of all that, and you break away from that and become independent and substantiate your true personality in the correct psychodynamic formation that's healthy. That's what we're trying to achieve here, so you can achieve your full potential, your destiny. right? And so, yeah. And so let's talk a little bit now about, so what you want to do is you actually, the mother complex, we're going to talk about the mother and the father complex a little bit here. So the mother complex is basically, it's said that you need to break away from the mother complex because it's what you were grown up with. The mother in general is who looks after you in general. It's who provides for you. And that's like kind of how you grow up. And then you want to break away from that because you don't want to become soft or weak. So the mother complex can keep you dependent on the mother, keep you there in a relationship with the mother where you become codependent and you can't leave the mother because you are stuck there. You're dependent on that sustenance from the mother providing you an environment which makes your life easier. You don't want that. You want to be independent, be strong enough to function without the support of the mother. That is the whole idea of the different traditions throughout societies and tribes and cultures of having initiation of men, of manhood, to break away from the mother to now become a man. Right? But then there's also the father complex. And so the father obviously helps you to be independent, to be strong. But what it can also do if it becomes overly rigid is it results in these rigid thoughts and demands that don't suit who you really are as an individual. So it will put onto you these rigid ideas and advice that does not really apply to the actual nature of who you really are. Because there is a creativity to kind of the feminine aspect of who you are. So this negative father aspect will be hypercritical. So it's when you're kind of criticizing yourself and you're thinking of your life in such this rigid way. I have to do everything in this particular way or I'm a failure. No, you're not. It's ridiculous. Why do you have to do it in that way? And then Jung talks about there's two stages. When you're younger, so when you're in your 20s in particular, 20s to maybe early 30s, if you have a negative aspect of, because there's a positive aspect of the mother complex, right? Which is nurturing, which is positive, but the negative aspect of the mother complex when you're younger is that it makes you too feminine, especially as a man, and that makes you weaker. So you can't actually cope with life. You can't cope with work. You can't cope with the challenges of life. And you essentially are still a child, even though you're meant to be an adult. That's not good. That's the negative aspect of the mother. It's a perverse relationship that you might have with your physical mother, or you might just have in your psychology with the mother complex, you see? And then, so you have to overcome that and you have to positively integrate the mother complex into your life and trying to overcome those negative aspects of the mother, which will make you weak and useless like a child. So you need the fatherly aspect to make you stronger so you can forge a way in life, so you can be strong, independent, work hard, know what you're doing. You don't have to rely on someone else, right? But the father complex can be negative and make you, and especially with women, can make them too critical, too rigid in their ideas. That's what the father complex does. Makes you very rigid. Kind of think of like a hierarchical structure that's very rigid. And that will dampen your creativity. You can't actually be yourself if that's the case. You might be disciplined, but now you're freaking rigid and you don't have new ideas coming out. So they're the negative aspects that can hinder you when you're younger. But actually, Jung says when you're older, because Jung's psychology basically is meant to be a psychology of the second half of life, when you're like 40 years and older. And, it's still applicable, I would say, throughout your whole life if you're a really wise person. But in general, to most people, it applies to the second half of life, because the first half of life is building up your ego. You're meant to have a healthy ego to build it up so you can be strong in the world and relate to the world and adapt to the world. But then the second half of your life is actually like, oh, okay, there's more to this than just my ego and this culture that I'm in, right? And so it's more the spiritual side of life. And now you're meant to now reintegrate the aspect of the mother and father complex, particularly the mother complex in the sense that it represents spirituality, but it's no longer like returning to the mother, like as in of the womb of the past when you were a child. You're now returning to the mother as an adult in the sense that you're integrating the feminine aspect of who you are as a man, basically. And if you're a woman, you're integrating the masculine aspect of yourself as, that fatherly aspect of yourself as you're growing up. But it's not in a negative sense. It's in that more positive sense of feeling secure, feeling security, feeling strong, feeling strength. And so there's so we need to integrate the mother and father complex. And part of that is pulling back and dissolving the projection. So if you become conscious that you're projecting an infantile manifestation of the complex of the mother or father onto others, so you might be projecting onto all women the mother complex that is not operating optimally, or the father complex that's not operating optimally to all men. So you need to pull back that projection and try to become conscious of it so you can dissolve that complex, so you can properly orientate and balance out the feminine and the masculine within you. And a lot of that is about appropriately aligning the libido, right? So you can become self-determined and really achieve your individual destiny, like I talked about before. So that's really some of the interesting aspects of the father and mother, aspects in our life. And so I just want to read this one last thing I will end on from people who have felt rejection from their family. I found this quote in the Bible, and again, I want you to take it as a psychological principle, right? And this is what it says in the Bible. It says in Psalm 27, verse 10 to 14, it says, "Though my father and mother forsake me, the Lord will receive me. Teach me your way, Lord. Lead me in a straight path because of my oppressors. Do not turn me over to the desire of my foes, for false witnesses rise up against me, spouting malicious accusations. I remain confident of this. I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Wait for the Lord, be strong, and take heart and wait for the Lord." Okay, so I found that really powerful when it says, "Though my father and mother forsake me, the Lord will receive me." In the psychological interpretation, that means even if you do not have a good relationship with your father and mother, even if they're abusive, even if they reject you, right? And they don't understand you as an individual, the Lord or the unconscious will compensate for that, right? Because the unconscious, Jung talks about the collective unconscious, which is the transpersonal element of who we are, which is basically the collective unconscious is the unconscious that we all share in. So that's where the God image operates. That's where the archetype of wholeness operates. So in other words, if you're missing something in consciousness, if you're missing, your father and your mother, if your father and mother have forsaken you, then the unconscious is that God is there in the unconscious. The God image is there. The unconscious will compensate for you. And you'll see it in your dreams. You'll see it in your life manifested in different ways throughout the stories that you're experiencing in your life and your experiences. There will be a compensation. You will be, if you were rejected from your family, you will be received from God, from the divine. Okay, so that's my message for you, basically. So yeah, I hope you guys have enjoyed this. I hope you have a merry, 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 merry Christmas, or whatever you believe in. If you believe in something else and you're having a different holiday, then God bless you. Because, the perennial philosophy, we're all one in the unconscious. And, I thank you for listening. I hope you found this informative. Share any comments. If you've shared stories, I want to hear you going and observing your family now with this context, and come back on Boxing Day, the day after Christmas, and share your experiences of your new observations that you've had when you're looking for, okay, this person's a bit dysfunctional here. I've noticed this pattern in this person. Remember, don't look at the cultural aspect of people when you're trying to observe them. Observe them as a biological being, biological and psychological patterns, seeing how people behave and operate. Don't look at them as, oh, that's my uncle, good old uncle, and we're at Christmas and we're happy. Forget all that. Observe them as who they are, as an actual biological pattern. If you're able to see through that lens, you'll be able to have pure perception. Don't make judgments. Just perceive. Allow your perception to lead so you can see who people really are. If you can do that, you really have the gift of perception. Do not judge. Be like a child, is what it says in the Bible. And what that means is drop your cultural understanding and all learning of understanding in life. Be like you're fresh, like a biological child, like a fresh biology. See and perceive what really is transpiring right in front of you. That's what you want to do. So just perceive, don't judge. Don't have a cultural judgment of, is this person a good person, or is this, is this person dressed well, or they come across. Forget all that judgment and perceive. Use perception, your perceiving functions, to see who the people are in front of you. Once you're able to do that, you will be able to see and identify the patterns that they operate under, then reflect on yourself and see the patterns you have within your own life, and how you relate to them within a family pattern, how their pattern and your pattern are in relation to each other, the dynamic between your mind and the patterns in yourself and your personality, and the patterns in the family and their personality, right? Observe and perceive those patterns, and you will receive the best gift you can ever have for Christmas, which is an understanding of your family and your own life, and how to further develop your psychology to become more of who you really are. Because that's all life is really about, right? Connecting to the transpersonal to completely manifest your full potential. That's your purpose. So have a Merry Christmas, and I'll see you in the next video.